As if you couldn't
Warning.
think any less of me with the
following
MLP
contains
stuff. Now I do a
substances
Thomas
which may
the
be
Train
unsettling for some
creepypasta.
viewers. Also,
I've
this
seen
audio
Horror of the
is not
Rails,
made for
all the
kids.
versions,
It is
so
for
meh.
older fans and adults who still like the franchise. So,
Even
Copper,
if Mattel doesn't.
enjoy.
Basically. Thank you, some call me Johnny.
The old
The
lead
old-
mine.
Yeah. FNAF?
The wet season had come to the island of Sodor, bringing with it a wave of storms that battered every part of the railway. The Little Western, which was right next to the sea, was the hardest hit. So the Fat Controller had ordered stone to be brought down from the Farquhar branch, which would be used to make barriers to help protect the line. Unfortunately,
Makes
the
sense.
Farquhar quarry was closed due to maintenance on the track. So, Thomas and Percy had to bring stone down from the old lead mines instead. Percy didn't mind this, since it gave him the chance to see Duck again. Thomas, on the other hand, was less enthusiastic. He didn't like visiting the old place, since he had an accident a few years ago. Due to his own carelessness, he ignored
Yeah, that was
the
your own
danger
fault.
sign, and caused the track beneath him to collapse, falling into an old mine shaft. The other
Based on a
engines
true
loved
story.
teasing him every chance they got. Duck and Percy especially. He caught the two of them one day chatting in the yards. Duck was curious and asking Percy about the old lead mines. "Before the quarry opened," he answered, "it used to be one of the most profitable businesses on the branch. Or so I was told." "What happened?" Duck asked. "Times change, I suppose. I heard the place was becoming too expensive to upkeep. Not to mention
Eh,
the opening of
mines
the
can't go
Farquhar
on
quarry
forever.
was the final nail in the coffin. They did their best
Yeah.
to keep afloat, like cutting costs and running the mines dry, but it was practically running on its last legs by the time Thomas arrived. Duck had never really visited much of Thomas's branch line, so he was
Surprised they're going
quite
back there
amused.
then. Eh.
"Tell me, Percy, what's it like up there?" "Well, it's not the prettiest sight on our branch, I'll tell you that. We mostly have to be very careful when we go up there. A lot of the track and equipment have been run to the ground." "And don't get me started on all the mine shafts that are underneath the rails. I heard the lads were getting really desperate by the time they started digging those." "Best not to mention mines in case Thomas is about," Duck joked.
It's right there.
"Well," remarked Percy, "he should have known that the track wouldn't have been able to support his big fat bunker." Thomas seized with frustration. He was never too keen on being offended. He knew that Duck
Who
wouldn't let
is?
him hear the end of it, now that this was on his mind. The other engines on the branch had already teased him about it to no end, and he'd grown as tired as the wear on his wheels. As he went to sort out his train, he started coming up with a plan.
This will go terribly wrong.
Thomas spent the rest of the day fussing up and down the branch. It was his turn to deliver the stone to help protect the line. He found the work tiring and dull, having to constantly stop and start in different places so the workman can unload his trucks and start building. Although, this gave him plenty of time to think of a scheme to pay the two green engines out. That evening, he waited in a siding for his last truck to be unloaded. But then, Duck pulled into the station with a passenger train. He took note of Thomas's impatience and saw the opportunity for a tease. "More
Of
stone
course.
from the old lead mine," he remarked. "Hope you didn't have to fall into another pit to get this lot. That wouldn't be the Great Western way, I guarantee you that."
It would
Thomas
never suit his
groaned.
grace. Oh wait, wrong character.
While Duck grinned cheekily. "But if I am being serious, I'm surprised you don't keep those mines in better condition. I've been here long enough to know that you guys take care of things very well. Not as well on the Great Western, of course, but well enough.
Hey.
I mean, it's no wonder you managed to fall down an old mine shaft. You're just lucky the Fat Controller was able to fish you out. I mean, back while I was working on the mainland, I have heard stories about engines falling down chasms and being unable to be rescued. Not on the Great Western,
Regularly?
of course, but While Duck was chatting away to himself,
He's literally
a
going blah
sneaky
blah blah
idea
blah blah.
flew into Thomas's funnel. He did want to do this with Percy as well, but one engine was as good as another. You know, Duck, Thomas interrupted, you do have a point. A point? About what? Duck asked. Well, Thomas answered ominously, you're right. I was very lucky to be rescued from those pits, especially considering what happened to the other engine that used to work up there. Duck was confused. He didn't know that there were any other engines working up there before Thomas arrived. But at the same time, someone had to, otherwise the branch wouldn't have even been built. Who did work on your branch line before you did anyway? I asked
Coffee
Percy
pot
about
engine.
it, and he didn't know. Well, answered Thomas. He paused ominously. Are you sure you would like to know? It's not a very pleasant story. Duck stared at his smug face. He could see right through Thomas's cheeky deception. His trick was as plain as the number 1 on his side tanks. He knew it was best just to ignore him. Although, his curiosity couldn't help but tug at his coupling rods. What other engines worked on the branch before him? And what did he mean by not being the first engine to fall down the mines? It could just be a stupid bluff to try and get his attention. All the same, he wouldn't know unless he asked. Alright, Thomas. You have my attention. Who was the first engine to fall into those lead mines? Thomas grinned mischievously. Duck had fallen right into his trap. Well, my water-dwelling friend, I overheard what you and Percy were talking about earlier about the old lead mine closing. And while most of that stuff is true, like the mine running dry and becoming too expensive, all of that wasn't exactly the main reason. Duck raised an eyebrow. Alright, what was it then? Thomas felt giddy, but he didn't dare show it. He began his story.
Once upon a time, there was a little
Long
who was
before
trying
I
to get
took
home.
the branch line
wrong
for my own,
story.
it was ran by a small fleet
Oh.
of odd-looking engines called
We are bringing up the
coffee
coffee
pots.
pot engines.
The first and last of them was called Glynn. I knew him.
Huh.
He was a nice fellow.
Was
He and his
dead.
brother and sisters ran the line very well, taking passengers to their proper destinations and collecting goods up and down the branch to take to the harbor. All of their clients appreciated their work, but none more so than, of course, the old lead mine. Whenever the coffee pots would come here, they would shunt a row of trucks into the mine shaft to be loaded up. They would then take the loaded trucks down the branch and to the harbor to be taken to the mainland and beyond. All the engines were warned to be careful when going up to the old lead mine, especially when pushing their trucks into the mine shafts. One derailment could trap a group of miners at best, or cause a cave-in at worst. All the engines understood. Well, almost all of them. This coffee pot engine was number 4. He was painted green and had cowcatchers and side plates so he could go up the old tramway. He meant well, but he was
I
a very
see.
cheeky sort, often playing pranks and scaring the other engines and staff. One of his favourite things to do was disappear in the tunnels of the old lead mines while shunting trucks, only to jump out and surprise anyone who would dare get too close. Everyone warned him to be careful, but he took little notice. His driver and firemen weren't much help either. They didn't see any harm in the engine's pranks. Just a bit of harmless fun, they would always say. And for the longest time, I suppose it was. Until that fateful day. The little green coffee pot was shunting a row of trucks into the mine shaft to be loaded, and he and his crew weren't paying much attention. Normally, one of the workmen would act as a banker to make sure one of the trucks didn't derail. However, almost everyone, was on break, and the crew was too impatient to wait. It probably would have been wiser if they did. They were halfway through the tunnel by the time they were noticed. "Stop! Stop!" one of the workmen shouted. But they paid little attention. The green coffee pot especially. He was too busy pondering about his next victim. The crew disappeared into the darkness, and before any of the workmen could chase after them, the entire mineshaft collapsed.
Shit.
Luckily, no one else was in there, but the trucks, the engine's crew, and the engine itself were completely buried alive. There was nothing anyone could do. They didn't have the right equipment to save them, and even if they did, it would have been too late either way. The old lead mines wasn't the same after that. Strange things would happen to the workmen who would go inside the tunnels. Some of them would start getting sick, becoming timid and disoriented. Even when they started mining underneath the track, it didn't help much. As the years went by and the coffee pot engines started being withdrawn and scrapped, business started declining in the old mines. Very few people were working there by the time I came around. Most of them quit, either due to sickness or to fear. But if you were to ask one of the sick ones what they saw while they were in the mine, they would claim that some of the rocks would glow a bright green, before seeing the ghost of the engine and his crew, chuffing through the mine shafts, never seeing the light of day again, but always looking for someone to scare.
Of course.
"Thomas," said a very dismayed Duck, "did you honestly think I would be scared of a stupid story like that? If telling me that rubbish was your way of trying to get me back, I'd say you'd failed miserably." Thomas didn't say anything at first. He just kept grinning mischievously. "Okay, fine.
What are you planning?
If you really think I'm lying to you, then why don't you go up there and see for yourself? There's one last stone train that needs to be delivered for tomorrow. If you don't believe me, then you should be able to bring it here without a fuss." "I can't," Duck said sternly. "I have a ballast train to take this afternoon." "Then how about we swap?" suggested Thomas. "You go up my branch, and I'll fetch your ballast train." Duck pondered this for a moment. He wasn't too fond of playing by someone else's rules, but he was interested in seeing what the old lead mine looked like. In the end, he let his curiosity get the better of him.
Because it served him so well before.
"Alright, fine. But I'm only going up there to look at the place, not because of your stupid story." "Sure," remarked Thomas. "Just remember to keep an eye on the old shafts. You don't want number 4 popping out to drag you into the mines." Duck snorted and puffed away at the sound of the whistle. At first, Duck was enjoying himself. He strolled down the line, enjoying the evening air, surrounded by the innocent cries of small animals, and the wide-open fields and trees as green as his paintwork. He found it quite peaceful. However, his mood changed as soon as he came to the old lead mine. Duck surveyed the area. "Phew, Percy was right," he said, disgusted. "This place has seen better days." Throughout the area, he could see rotten buildings that looked like they would collapse at any second, and rusty sidings that looked like they hadn't been touched in a long time. On one of the rusty lines, he could see a red danger sign, with a giant trap hole in the middle of the track. That must have been where Thomas had his accident, he thought.
Yep.
But then, something else beyond that caught Duck's eye. He could see a lonely mine shaft in the distance, with most of the track in front of it ripped up. This made Thomas's story fly back into his funnel.
Oh.
Why
that's
am
what
I
it
even
was.
thinking
I
about
always
that?
wondered what that
He
random
remarked to
mine
himself.
shaft was that we saw
That
the
Thomas
point
will
of view
do
was
anything
about.
for attention. He was just trying to pay me out. I swear, if that engine ran on cheek instead of water, his boiler would have melted by now. Honestly, he's really running out of ideas if he thinks he can scare me with a stupid story like that. Duck kept grumbling to himself as he arranged a train for him to take back down the branch. However, despite everything he said, he couldn't help but feel uneasy as he traversed the old sidings, and even more so when he went near the mine shafts. Whenever he did, he couldn't help but feel like something was watching him, deep within the void. Night
And now
was
it's night, of
approaching
course.
fast. There weren't many lights around to illuminate the area, so everything Duck saw became more disturbing. He was glad that he was nearly finished. He just had to shunt one last row of trucks onto his train, and then he could return to the safety of his shed. Finally, he said to himself. See, Thomas? Nothing to worry about. Now, I just hope Oliver remembered to put the coaches in the right shed. All of a sudden, as Duck was reversing out of the siding, there was a huge bang, and a cloud of steam erupted from him like a volcano. Duck, are you alright? Asked his driver. No, said Duck weakly. I think that was my safety valve. I should have
God
known
damn
to
it.
check it before we came up here. Unfortunately, he was correct. It was his safety valve, which had burst. His driver and fireman shut off steam and then went to find
Me
help.
can't move. Great.
It didn't take long for night to fall after that. Duck had remained static in the siding for what felt like hours, and he was starting to lose patience. Seriously, does it really take this long on the branch line for some help to come? This is not
Evidently,
the Great
yes.
Western Way. And where are those two? They don't normally take this long.
Part of Thomas's plan.
Ah well, I guess I'll just get some rest. It's not like I'm going anywhere. And before he knew it, the Great Western engine drifted off into sleep, where his nightmares were fully awake.
Oh, great.
What? Who? Duck didn't know how long he was asleep. The only thing he did know was that he was startled by what sounded like an engine's whistle. But that couldn't be. It was far too late for any engines to come up here. Duck tried to get his smoke box together. "Who's there?" he yelled. No one replied. All he could hear was the sound of insects chirping in the fields, an owl hooting in the trees, and the sound of puffing in the... Wait,
Oh no.
what's that? Duck thought. Puffing? It was. Duck's eyes darted about to look where the sound was coming from. His gaze was led to one of the old mine shafts which he was parked next to. Duck was confused. Percy had told him that most of the mine shafts had been boarded up. Engines weren't allowed to go in them due to how unstable they were. And yet, he could hear the slow beat of one, and it only grew louder and louder with each passing second. Duck rallied his courage. "Thomas, is that you?" he demanded. "If this is your poor excuse of a joke, it's not funny. I would have thought you'd
Probably still
learned
the
after
dream.
what happened to you here. But hiding in an unstable mine shaft, that's not the Great Duck was cut off by what sounded like laughter. It didn't sound like Thomas's voice. In fact, Duck couldn't recognize it at all. It sounded like a child, and a very malevolent one at that. Just listening to it, amongst the puffing, caused his paint to crawl.
Oh, that's creepy.
Then, Duck heard another sound. It appeared to be the turning of rusty wheels. They sounded like they hadn't been oiled in a long time. The Great Western Engine was speechless. He couldn't do anything but just stare at the mine as the sounds continued to grow louder and louder. He shut his eyes as he tried to drown out the noise, but to no avail. Whatever was in those mines sounded closer than ever, and just when Duck thought things couldn't get any worse, he heard the sound of a loud, deep-toned whistle booming louder than his ever could. Duck was petrified. He wanted to move, but he couldn't. He didn't dare open his eyes to see what was going on. He didn't want to see what was going on. The only thing his closed eyes could pick up was a green glow seeping through them. Duck didn't have any courage anymore. He couldn't even speak. All he could do was listen. The next morning, Thomas was chuffing up the old branch in reverse to collect Duck in his train. The blue tank engine felt very pleased with himself, even though things didn't really go to plan. His original idea was to finish Duck's ballast run, and then sneak up to the old lead mine while he was still working, to try and scare him. However, the run took longer than he thought, and he was unable to make it there in time. He fell asleep that night very disappointed, but his mood quickly changed once he found out about Duck's predicament. By the time he arrived at the old lead mine, his boiler was bubbling with excitement, eager to tease Duck. He strolled alongside the Great Western Engine, with his well-known face of cheekiness. "Well, well, well," he remarked sarcastically. "Thought you could survive the night up here, huh? Did you manage to spot any coffee..." Thomas was taken aback.
He did.
He thought that Duck would be mad at him. But when he saw his face, he looked as pale as the steam from his funnel. His eyes were wide open. He didn't even notice Thomas coming in. He was entirely focused on the old mine shaft that he was parked next to. Thomas's surprise was turned to concern. "Duck?" he asked. Are you alright?" Only his driver responded. "We asked him the same thing when we came here this morning," he said. "You should have seen him. One minute he was dozing there comfortably, the next he was screaming louder than his whistle. He hasn't told us much, just that he had a bad dream. Makes me feel bad that we had to leave him up here for the night.
He hopes
But
it was a
we
dream.
couldn't get help until morning, and he was fast asleep by the time we went to tell him." Thomas felt sorry for Duck, and guilty towards himself. He wanted to pay the Great Western Engine out. He wanted to scare him, but not like this.
You scarred him for life. Good job.
He just shunted Duck in front of the train, and buffer to buffer, the two engines puffed home.
Was waiting for a last second jump scare, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I don't know, the engine's face or something like, I don't know. It's a creepy one. Reminds me of the freaking, I don't know. it is a good like horror of the rails sort of story. Like it would fit right in with those sorts of tales, just of creepy things in the past and ghost engines like that. I've actually heard a story like that that's actually kind of similar to that one. It was I couldn't. I don't. Give me a sec. I'm gonna try to find it. I'm gonna cut past, of course. Okay, I found it. It's called TRS-Phantom of the Branch Line, done by Shunter Productions. The basic premise of the story is Thomas tells his friends that, well, Percy and Toby, that there's a ghost engine up at the I think it was the mine. I haven't watched it in a bit. And it didn't want to be scrapped, but it was forced to be scrapped unknowingly or unwantingly. And then tells them to go up to this over there. They get scared, the usual stuff. If trucks move without an engine that they could see, oh no, it's the ghost engine. And then it turns out in the end, actually it is the ghost engine because Thomas was supposed to scare them and he wasn't there. It's like, oh no. It just kind of gave me that kind of vibe. It's like, okay, the whole idea of it being like, it's a ghost. No, it isn't. It's this person playing a trick. No, it is actually a ghost. Is a pretty common trend, especially in the horror community. It's ever since the Duncan gets spooked thing. It's like, that changed the landscape forever. And hasn't been back since. It's a good creepypasta sort of thing, though. Nice, scary one. It's nice to get some, train horror stories that aren't just the train will eat you, or it's Thomas, but he's a Shed 17, or what the fuck. I don't know. Horror comes in all shapes and sizes. It's got variety. There's almost as many types of horror stories as there are genders nowadays. I mean, I'm getting freaked out. I'm just glad there was no jump scares. That would be a little too cheap, eh? Now, Kappa, piss off. I do kind of wonder, though, why was this done in September and not October? Then again, I don't know. My main theory right now is there going to be more horror stories of this S-Code if this takes off? Maybe. Or maybe this is a one and done. In which case, it's like, why not wait for October? England doesn't celebrate 8 Halloween? Good reason as any, I guess. I don't know. Cross the bridge when we get to it. One bridge at a time, I guess. I don't know. So we're going to be working with models or Roblox? Because as long as not all engines go, we'll be fine.